I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Testing, 1, 2, testing. Okay, consent agenda at this point in time. There were several questions that came forward, and I can walk through the questions if desired, but if there are not any questions relative to the consent agenda, one item is being pulled tonight, which is the onboarding to be voted on, but all other items, I know Mr. Davis sent me some questions and something happened with the emails, but I provided him with an update of all of the items on it. And I'll gladly take any questions relative to the consent agenda.
I did still have a follow-up on the 11/9/2106 Delhi Star, and maybe even since Mr. Richardson is here, this could be something he could illuminate us on about this process. But in terms of this request for the district to work something out with someone who's seeking tax abatement or other incentives, have we ever done that before?
So in my tenure as superintendent, this has never occurred. This year, the city reached out to Dr. Bender to make us aware that this company was coming in town and encourage us to have a conversation with them, and really made a connection such that we could talk to them about how they could support the district in a real strategic kind of way. We had some preliminary conversations with going back and forth, and wound up sending something to Mr. Sanoma, who reviewed it, and then reached back out to them again, and they met the standard that we were asking them based on the original piece. So in my team, that has never happened before, that the city has directed a vendor to us who is getting a tax abatement to support the district in a very detailed kind of way. And so they are making some commitment. I want to say around 10 years. A lot of time they're here, to a financial commitment and a commitment around internships for our students as well. So in my tenure, outside of this, has never happened.
So I wonder if it would be helpful if we created sort of, I don't know if it's a template or a wish list, or something that we could provide to the city, and maybe it's in cooperation with SLDC or people at the Board of Aldermen, the HUD's committee, or something like that. One, so this is a good thing, but also, we don't want to have to recreate the wheel and spend our valuable staff time negotiating with every new developer that comes in and seeks tax abatement. Yes, this is progress. I don't know if it absolves the city of all of its sins in giving away tax money that we could use to educate our students, but it is progress. So that was just my thought. And I don't know also too, if in terms of the board's work, if we should consider, if this becomes an ongoing process, if there's a policy need as well. But that's just what's occurring to me reading this. And maybe Mr. Richardson has something to add to when he gives his presentation.
Got it. That's number
11/9/2106.
Yeah. I work with Dr. Bender in legal, and then obviously had some conversation with SLDC. I think, no, I don't think it's a matter of pulling. He just wanted some clarity around it.
I had one more question about the Stl Youth Jobs. So it looks like we are on progress, hopefully, to get participation on our goal for what we've already approved.
Yes, sir.
And then we will be doubling that hopefully with the city money.
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Do we feel optimistic that we can reach those goals?
I think there are two goals here, increase and also extension. We were ending the program in March. The intent is that the dollars will allow us to extend the program all the way to August, if possible. So we feel very comfortable that we can spend the $1.6 million to extend the opportunity for kids, as well as to increase the number of kids. The numbers you see here are 400. It does not include the CTE numbers, and that's kids that are already in CTE programs that we just simply have to lift out to allow. So we feel fairly comfortable that we will be able to meet the standard of the goal. Now, obviously, we have to work with transportation and other kinds of things. You got a list of the vendors, and there's 66. We have to make sure that the transportation can get kids from point A to point B. And as we already know that we're challenged with transportation right now, but the intent is that these kids will be able to get to those locations, work all the way through March with these dollars, work beyond March. But I think I feel comfortable right now based on what we see with the seniors that we're identifying that there's a level of excitement about these kids participating in this program.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Adams, I have a follow-up for that same item 06. Can you speak to recent graduates? How does that?
It does not impact recent graduates. We're only talking about seniors who are our current students now.
I understand, but it has recent graduates on the document. So should that be stricken? Third line, the end of that sentence, recent graduates.
We're looking at 1109-2107. No, that's the agreement that Mr. Davis was inquiring about. That's Delhi Star. So that would be for students who graduated as well. It would be current students and students who graduated last year in the past. You're welcome.
Dr. Adams, I do have a question, a follow-up question in reference to Stl Youth. So I just want to make sure I understand this. So we, St. Louis Public Schools have already committed to 1.6 million to get this program up and going.
That is correct.
And now we're saying that we're getting another 1.6 million from the city.
That is correct.
To do this, and that's still just focusing on 600 youth. I would think if we're doing it double like that, that we will at least get 1,200.
We don't have the capacity to support 1,200 students, quite frankly, Ms. Cousins. We graduate about 1,200 students a year. Many of these students are going to need to take full courses and not have the opportunity in January to be in internships. So it's really about extending the time from March, when we were looking to end with a $1.6 million budget, to go through April, May, June, and July. So that same pool of students could be extended, and if we could get more numbers than 600, we might get to 700, but we're not going to get to 1,200 students. It's going to be impossible to get to 1,200 students because of their own obligations to be in school full-time in January.
So you're saying with the first phase of the 1.6, that's only for 3 months?
That's only for February, March, and April. Yes, ma'am. It's 3 days a week for February, March, and April.
Okay.
There are no other items, Madam President. That concludes my updates.
Are there any additional questions for the consent agenda? If not, we're going to move forward and welcome Mr. Neil Richardson, Executive Director of St. Louis Development Corp., to the mic.
There you go.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Neil Richardson. I'm the Executive Director and Chairman of St. Louis Development Corporation, which is the economic development arm of the city of St. Louis and responsible for driving equitable and inclusive growth across the city and in the region. I would like to thank you to Dr. Adams, the St. Louis Public School Board of Directors, for the invitation. As St. Louis Development Corporation is excited about growing the partnership with SLPS as we seek to create collective impact together for the residents and the families in the city of St. Louis that we serve. I would also like to introduce my team, my Deputy Director, Lance Knuckles, who leads our Strategic Neighborhood Growth and Development, is present today, as well as my Chief of Staff, Daphne Moore, and also my Deputy Executive Director, Rob, is also here with us today. So tonight, we're planning to provide a quick overview of who SLDC is, our strategic vision for equitable economic development growth, and then how we plan to move forward with our economic justice action plan. I've also invited Mark Spikerman, who serves as legal counsel for SLDC with Gilmore and Bell, provides us with support as we are reviewing and negotiating many of our tax development incentive projects. He will be providing an overview of those various development tools, and we're excited to have him with us today. And also, I would like to further discussion around our future partnerships, how SLPS and SLDC can continue to work together to drive overall economic growth for our city, for our students, and for our residents overall. And through today's presentation, I hope it becomes evident that the success of St. Louis Public Schools is also the success of St. Louis Development Corporation as we seek to drive economic development growth, and that it's interdependent upon each other. So as we're seeking to drive inclusive growth across our city, we're aiming to bring families back into the city of St. Louis and ultimately support the school district. In 2019 through 2020, my predecessor, Otis Williams, through the St. Louis Development Corporation, worked in engaging the city across the board around how do we develop an equitable economic development framework. The goal from this framework that we found is that we need to reverse the decades of population decline in the city of St. Louis. We have an overarching goal of increasing our population by 30,000 residents by the year 2030. But we understand in order to achieve that, we must address the historical barriers, the economic inequities, and closing the gap between people and opportunity. And for us, that really begins with our youth and our families. In our latest census, we noticed that we've lost over 17,000 residents from the city of St. Louis. And many of those residents have come from our most marginalized and vulnerable communities. So if we're going to reverse this trend, we must work together strategically on driving economic growth that leads to stronger schools, stronger businesses, stronger neighborhoods, and overall stronger economy. And that's why economic justice will be the center of our strategic plan as SLDC moves forward. We will center workforce development, ensuring that we're investing in our youth, our unemployed and underemployed residents, to ensure they have the necessary access and skills to move into the labor force, to build careers, and ultimately support a family. We also are looking to grow our businesses, our small businesses that are led by women and minority-owned, and ensure that they have the necessary access to capital, the mentorship, sponsorship, and technical assistance to enter, grow, and to scale. And as we're bringing these businesses to the city of St. Louis, we want to ensure that they are able to hire more employees, work strategically with the St. Louis Public Schools and other job training programs to ensure that we're growing our overall employee base. And we also know that we must improve our neighborhoods. We must invest in the capacity building of our community development corporations, ensuring that they have the access and assets and resources to be able to support home ownership, entrepreneurship, and career-oriented transit. I see this neighborhood revitalization as a key component to our strategy, specifically how we work with the school district. Because if we continue to lose homeowners, if we continue to see increased vacancy, that has a double bottom line impact on the school district. One way is that we lose the tax base for many of those homes. And then also we're losing those families. So we must strengthen these neighborhoods. We must focus on the vacancy and the dilapidated housing. We must focus on beautifying our areas in order to attract the residents that we want to see and retain them to ensure that they have a safe, livable, and exciting environment in which they want to raise a family. And finally, the key component of tonight's presentation is around our transformation of our equitable and inclusive incentive model. We want to ensure that as we are driving economic benefit and economic impact to the city of St. Louis, that we do it in a more inclusive way that includes creating community benefit agreements, such as the one I think you all discussed around Deli Star, ensuring that if we are providing incentives to businesses to come in the city of St. Louis, that they're ultimately driving public benefit as well. And that includes job training programs, that includes first source employment, that also includes linkage programs in which we have investment that's happening in maybe our more affluent areas, ensuring that the benefit of that abatement and those incentives are being driven to areas that are underserved and need it the most. And I hope that you are able to see that there are strategic partnerships between St. Louis Development Corporation and SLPS across all four of these pillars. As we look at workforce development, driving workforce opportunities for our students, and also training, business empowerment, attracting businesses, being able to have stronger neighborhoods, and ultimately ensuring that the greatest economic benefit from the investment that we make through incentives is realized by the schools themselves. So we look forward to having that conversation. Tonight is really an overview or introduction to who we are, because as we move this economic justice action plan forward, we want to ensure that the board, superintendent, the principals and teachers, and most importantly, our students and our families have a voice at the table as we're developing this plan. Lance Knuckles, our Director of Strategic Growth and Development, and myself will be part of the citywide planning process that SLPS is currently undergoing, and we look forward to continuing to work with you all to ensure that we create equitable and inclusive growth. If there are not any direct questions to me at this moment, I would like to pass it over to Mark Spikerman with Gilmore and Bell, and then I will come and wrap up the presentation as it relates to next steps and future partnership opportunities. Any immediate questions? Okay, great.
Thank you. As Mr. Richardson said, my name is Mark Spikerman. I am a SLPS parent as well as an attorney at Gilmore and Bell. Gilmore and Bell is a boutique law firm. We specialize in all things public finance. It means we help schools, cities, counties, hospitals, any sort of local government or nonprofit finance and fund various projects and programs. Part of my responsibilities at the firm is to help St. Louis Development Corp with their economic development mission. Next few minutes, these next few slides are going to be sort of the nuts and bolts, the technical presentation. If I talk too fast, if I use acronyms and you don't understand them, please interrupt. I won't be offended. I'll answer them right away. There are three basic types of incentive programs that SLDC uses to foster economic development in the city. Those include tax addition programs, where we're adding a new tax to a certain area, tax abatement, where there's taxes and we're abating them, and tax redirection, where there are taxes for one purpose and they're being redirected to another purpose. What's not listed here is tax credits. There's brownfield credits, historic tax credits. Those involve mostly state and federal tax sources. The three that are up here on the slide, those are your local tax incentives. Tax addition, when we say extra taxes, those most commonly come in the form of a community improvement district, a transportation development district, or a special business district. These are delineated areas, districts within the city in which an additional tax, perhaps it's a 1% sales tax or a property tax or a special assessment, they're levied within that area. The users in that area, the shoppers, the workers, the residents will pay those taxes, not the whole city. And those taxes go to fund special projects or services within those delineated district boundaries. They can also be used when we talk about a development project to offset the need for tax abatement, because it does provide a revenue source that can be used to incentivize a project without having to go into sort of general citywide taxes. Tax abatement, it's again, a really simple concept. If taxes were this, the property owner would pay less. There are various programs under Missouri law that allow for tax abatement, some dating back to the 1940s. Some of those programs are very well designed for single family homes, dilapidated homes, vacant school buildings, other projects like that. Other programs are more designed to attract jobs and new business to the state of Missouri and the city of St. Louis. Regardless of the program that's used, a few basic sort of policy points that go into a review. Most of those projects are 10 years or less of abatement. Most of those projects within the last year or two and moving forward are less than 100% abatement. And that in general, for several years, the abatement programs have only affected new taxes. So if a property was generating $10,000 in taxes before abatement, it would only be the taxes above that $10,000 amount that are subject to abatement. So the school, the city, the other taxing districts would always receive at least that $10,000 during the term of the abatement. We've got a case study here, and we've got another case study later on. This is the Lafayette Lofts building. It's at 815 Ann Street in the Soulard neighborhood. In 2016, it was renovated for 36 apartments. Back in 2016, this property generated $12,700 in taxes. It is, when it comes off the tax abatement in 2026, based on current market values of the property, we anticipate that it's going to be generating $66,000 in taxes. You're looking at roughly more than $1,500 an apartment unit in that case. This would be more of a medium property sized project. There are smaller projects, there are larger projects, but this is a good example of what one in sort of the mid-year of its abatement period looks like. The third sort of category is tax redirection. That's got the nasty three-letter word TIF. TIF, or tax increment financing, is available currently in 49 states and the District of Columbia. The only state that it's not used in is Arizona. I have no idea why Arizona does not use it. In Missouri, it was first approved in 1982. And then after a Supreme Court ruling in 1989, it became more widely used. A typical TIF approval process takes several months. It starts with an application from a developer, and then it goes through an analysis by SLDC. SLD's analysis is very thorough, and it answers two main questions. One, is TIF needed for this project? Will the project occur without TIF? If it will occur without TIF, the project doesn't get TIF. That's a statutory requirement. The other is the project worth the city's investment. If, for instance, in downtown, there are very tall buildings, it's a very dense environment. We need every block of downtown to be able to generate a lot of taxes. If the project post-TIF would not generate a lot of taxes and it's meant for downtown, then it's probably not a good fit for a TIF project. This analysis will stop bad projects, but if a project gets through, its next step is the Tif Commission. The Tif Commission is a commission made up of representatives from various taxing districts, including 2 from the school district. That Tif Commission reviews a redevelopment plan, a blight study, and a cost benefit analysis showing the effects of the TIF on all the various taxing districts' tax rates or tax revenues, I'm sorry. That TIF Commission then ultimately will make a recommendation to the Board of Aldermen. They will say either, yes, this is a good use of TIF, we recommend you approve the plan, or no, this is not a right use of TIF. After the TIF Commission's recommendation, it will go to the Board of Aldermen, who has the final say. So how does TIF work? Well, first of all, it only is available in areas that meet statutory definitions of blighted area or conservation area. And there is that but-for test, which I alluded to earlier, that the project could not occur but for TIF. If that finding can't be made, then the TIF can't be approved. The benefit of TIF, if you're from a developer's perspective, is that you're able to take taxes that are generated from your redevelopment of the property. So if you've got a base year and taxes go up because you've invested millions of dollars in this property, you can take that increase in tax and you can redirect it to pay costs related to that redevelopment. I've got a couple slides here that better illustrate that. So this one's got a chart. If you can see the purple sort of rectangle at the bottom of the chart, that is the base year tax revenues. So if a property was generating $10,000, it's going to continue to generate at least $10,000 straight to the taxing districts. It's sort of lighter yellow triangle. That's the increase in value of the property because someone has invested millions of dollars into it. That increase is what could get redirected as part of the TIF. And what goes into that increase? Well, there's the tax levies down there, you see on the side. It includes most of the taxing districts. And there are a few exceptions. Those exceptions include the Missouri Blind Pension, the sheltered workshop taxes, commercial surcharge. I'm not sure if you know what a commercial surcharge tax is, but it's an extra $1.70 tax that's taxed on every commercial property in the city of St. Louis. And a majority of that $1.70 goes to the school district. Personal property taxes for individuals, that means the taxes we pay on cars in our garage. For businesses, that's the taxes they pay on furniture, computers, manufacturing equipment. And then any increase, voter-approved increase in tax is also immune from pre-existing TIFs. So if a increase in tax was approved this year, it would not be subject to TIFs that were approved in 2019, 2018, 2017, so forth. The other end of the TIF world is we call economic activity taxes, or EATs. These are your sales taxes, your earnings taxes, taxes that are generated from economic activity occurring on the now redeveloped property. Those include, these really affect mostly the city and a little bit of Great Rivers Greenway. The taxes that are not subject to it include the school tax, the Metrolink, state sales tax. The other thing, even for the city taxes here, is on the real property tax, whereas the TIF will redirect 100% of the new taxes. On the sales tax side and the earnings tax side, it will only redirect 50% of the new sales and earnings taxes. So how does a TIF affect the school district? Well, with respect to real property taxes, you continue to get that base year amount. Again, if using our example, if property generated $10,000 before TIF, that $10,000 is going to stay in place through the life of the TIF. The school district will get its share of the commercial surcharge tax. That $1.70 multiplied by the increase in assessed value resulting from the investment in the property, portion of that will go to the city or to the school. School will get its full personal property taxes. If a business moves in, all their investment in equipment, it's all subject to personal property tax. That'll go to the school. And then likewise, the school sales tax also is immune from TIF. And if you've got a project that has a large retail component, And if you've ever come to a Tif Commission meeting and you see data that's presented, often that data will show that there's a very high benefit to the school because it's capturing all that sales tax generated from a retail project. And so we've got a case study here from a sort of retail dominated TIF district. This is the Loughborough Commons in far South City. It's got a Lowe's, a Schnucks. There's a picture here of an Office Max, but it's recently been replaced by a Ross Dress for Less and one of the busiest Starbucks ever. This project was approved in March 2005. A TIF can last up to 23 years. So that means at the very latest, it's out of here in 2028. We all hope it will pay off early. Back in 2005, before it was redeveloped, it was generating about $100,000 in property taxes and $428,000 in sales taxes. I believe there was a old Schnucks located on the site, or an old national grocer. Based on current sales at the site, we're looking at about a 350% increase in tax revenues when this TIF goes away. So yes, the taxing districts have foregone certain tax revenues during the period of the TIF. The end result, though, is when the TIF expires, tax revenues are now 350% higher than they were before the TIF. Now, that's a lot to digest. I know it's somewhat technical, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I can hand it back to Mr. Richardson.
I have a question.
Yes.
The question is, so when the TIF expires, and if the business has moved out of the state or they've gone out of business, what happens?
So you're referring to a scenario where perhaps in 2029, Schnucks or Lowe's goes out of business.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that property will still generate tax revenues. Someone will own it and have to pay property taxes. If a new occupant comes in and generates sales taxes, those will continue to flow just like any other property in the city.
I've always been curious as to, where's the TIF information located, or the tax abatement? If a business gets all these tax breaks, where can the public go to find out when their tax abatement is lifted or the TIF is due or what have you?
There are a variety of places on the city assessor's website, Geo St. Louis. There is a redevelopment code on each property. So if you look up an address, there'll be a little code and you can click on it and it will tell you, it's a little hard to decipher, but it'll tell you whether it's tax abatement and what year the tax abatement expires.
Is it possible that your new project, that you can make it a little simpler for the public? Because I've always found it real difficult. I would look up something and I never could really figure out when that project started, when they got the tax break, or when it was due. I found out that there are several businesses here in the city of St. Louis that probably have never paid their taxes, and who would know, since the public can't go and check on them and they don't know about the little number that you just talked about.
That website actually will show if taxes have been paid as well. But you have to look up a specific address. I also understand that I think SLDC has been working on a more user-friendly interface for public transparency on redevelopment incentives.
I have a question. I see the case studies that you've shown, and I see the one on Loughborough. Has there been any TIF projects on the north part of the city?
There have been, obviously there was the North Side Regeneration TIF, McKee's TIF, which I know is very controversial. The issue we see on TIFs is that TIFs work best when there is a large, specifically eats component that generates TIF revenues. What we see, and those are unfortunately pretty much the central corridor. There are not a lot of TIFs other than Loughborough Commons, very far south either, because there's just not enough density to support a large generation of TIF revenues. What we see on the outskirts more are other incentive programs, including tax credit programs being used frequently throughout the north side.
And in reference to the tax abatement, I see some of the properties that you showed, again, the schools and things of that nature. And I think part of the question that I would have is, you're saying that the value, say one of the properties you showed us at the time it sits and there's nothing happening with it, the value is like $10,000. And you're saying then that's the taxes that whoever will own it will have to be paying that $10,000. So for 10 years of the tax abatement, they're just paying $10,000 for that property, correct?
It depends on in recent years, there have been very few 100% tax abatements going on. So if it were more and more, it's 50%, 75%. So you may see that 10,000 go up to 20 or 30,000 immediately and be that way through the end of the abatement period before it goes up to the full. I think our case study had 66,000
on tax abatement.
Yep.
So I'm just trying to make sure I understand. So if that property sits for 10 years,
if that property sits vacant
nothing's
for 10
happening,
years,
right?
your 10,000 may actually go down because the property could become more dilapidated and lose value.
And there's no income coming into
Right.
to that. Okay.
Is the data tracked on the impact that like property and sales tax exemptions have on SLPS? Is that being tracked regularly?
There is the GASB 77 is a governmental accounting standard that requires the reporting of the value of tax abatements. So that information is in the city CAFR, their comprehensive annual financial reports. I'm not sure about the schools, but I imagine it might be in that as well.
Kind of going back about where the partial abatements are now the norm. Is there a cap on how much abatement we can give in the city?
There, depending on the incentive program used, they have various duration limits or amount limits, but a lot of it is subject to negotiation.
But so, and I think have been some, or at least some that have floated like 25, 100% tax abatements. They could do that.
There have been those in the past, probably more than people would like to have seen, but they've generally been limited to very unique, very large projects.
And so there's political pressure to make the partial abatements the norm, but there's no actual regulation. So for example, Kansas City, I think, has just passed some limitations. So the max they could give is 10-year, 70%, but we don't have that in the city.
We do not have that in the city, correct?
And could you just explain other entities? So I'm thinking of the SLU redevelopment area, who, from my understanding, just reading the paper, they've got power in their redevelopment area to grant 25-year 100% if they want to, without approval from the Board of Aldermen. Or is that correct?
So the SLU Redevelopment Corporation exists under a program called Chapter 353. That's the reference to the chapter of the Missouri statutes. It allows urban redevelopment corporations, which includes the St. Louis Midtown Redevelopment Corporation, to provide tax or to grant tax abatement within delineated boundaries. SLU in particular does have an agreement with the city. It has a lot of power, but there is some city oversight in that as well.
But SLU has a lot of power to give 25-year 100% tax abatements on projects in that area. Is that right?
Some of the properties within that area, yes.
Are there any other, what did you say, Chapter 353?
Chapter 353. There was one with Cortex. Cortex now mainly uses a TIF district. And there have been sort of smaller, more single site 353s, not very routinely, but few here and there.
And on your list of these, one thing that I didn't see on here is tax assurance. Is that something that we started doing? I thought I've heard that there's some projects that have a tax assurance rather than tax abatement.
Yeah, and what that is, when we use an abatement program, we have the ability to negotiate a payment in lieu of actual taxes. So the abatement program under statute might say 0 taxes. Well, we impose a contractual payment that looks and is measured very similar to taxes. So when you get to the tax assurance, we've had a few projects that say, we think we can afford full taxes, but what we can't afford is an unexpected increase in our assessment. And so SLDC has looked at the numbers and said, yes, we agree, your assessment should be Y based on everything we know today. So we will use an abatement program and a contractual payment in lieu of tax to basically lock it in at Y for a period of time.
So that's sort of like a compromise. It's an incentive to the
Right.
developer. It gives stability so they can go get financing.
Exactly. It reduces their risk, which makes their lender and their pro forma look a lot tighter.
But it also produces a higher amount of property taxes for the school district.
Correct.
And is that something that is purely in SLDC's domain to then negotiate with developers when they come in?
I mean, anyone seeking tax assurance or tax abatement could negotiate with SLDC, yes.
And I just had another question about blight, because I always am interested in this. You talk about the statutory definition of blight. Is there anything in the city of St. Louis that doesn't qualify as blight these days?
There are. For instance, the Deli Star project, it is located in a building that is not blighted. And we were asked to review it, and our determination was it was not blighted.
But we found other incentives for them other places.
They are bringing a lot of jobs and payroll. And when I say a lot of jobs, I mean a lot of jobs. 375, yeah, at an average wage of over 65,000.
Okay, thank you.
I'll turn it back over to
I have a
Mr.
quick question
Richardson.
for you. I actually have a quick question right
Sure.
here. When these tax incentives are given out and say a Schnucks built a grocery store on the corner of Kings Highway and Delmar, but then after 20 years closes, and say they use TIFs for that, are there any penalties for shutting down after receiving most of the TIFs?
If they are still waiting for tax revenues to be generated to reimburse them for projects costs, they obviously would probably not get reimbursed for shutting it down. Other than that, I mean, there are market, I mean, no one can predict the market 20 years out. There are potential market conditions that could result in an unexpected store closure. Now, what we do have a protection against is if that grocery store were to close one location and then go open up in another location and ask for a new TIF.
Or what about if a grocery store closes and then another grocery store opens on the exact same spot and thrives? Are there any
Then
penalties
the TIF continues with that
with
grocery
that
store. Yeah.
But no penalty on the one that closed for
No,
walking away?
The TIF is intended to solve a gap in upfront financing to get
Right.
the project
Mhm.
built.
Mhm.
So to a certain extent, it's a successful TIF if the project gets built.
Mhm.
I have a quick question. I'd like for you to go back and kind of explain, you indicated that if the building has a $10,000 price on it and that it can increase incrementally to maybe 66,000.
Yeah, we can get back to
The tax that's generated initially on the 10,000 that comes to the school district, does that increase in terms of at the end when the value of that property has increased?
Yeah, so with respect to this case study, the base year taxes were 12,700. I was just using 10,000 as a round number. Someone has invested $5.2 million into this project. If you invest $5.2 million into a project, the value of that building better go up. And it did. When value goes up, taxes go up. Right now, that increase in taxes is abated. The school district still gets the 12,700 that they split with the other taxing districts. In addition, they're getting personal property taxes from all the residents who live there. But then when this particular example expires, the tax abatement expires in 2026. So in 2027, the school district and the taxing districts are now going to be splitting roughly $66,000. That's that increase in value. So the abatement is temporary. It's 10, in this case, it was 10 years, which is not a short period of time, but it's temporary. At the end, I mean, it's not a windfall. You get what what the value is. And ideally, from a public policy perspective, it's value that would not be there if there was an abatement offered. And it's hard to really, I think, sink in. But if you look at this particular project, you can see that total project costs were $5.2 million. And the total projected property value was only $4.2 million. So somebody put $5.2 million in and is getting a $4.2 million value. Where's that gap made up? It's made up with incentives. Thank you very much.
I think that's a great transition point. I have a few slides that we've made some updates to. So we made a few updates and edits and was able to refresh our data from the presentation that we shared with you all last night. So I want to ensure that you all had the most up-to-date data. So thank you again, Mark Spikerman, for the presentation and answering the questions. But I want to ensure that the St. Louis Public School Board had an opportunity to see exactly the fiscal benefit that's been realized from these incentive projects over the last 3 years. And so in 2019, you'll see we had 49 projects that either received tax abatement or Tiff or some form of sales tax exemption. These projects cost over close to $600 million. And over the base benefit that the St. Louis Public Schools already receive in the form of tax revenue, we will see an increase of $27.6 million to the city of St. Louis, and then $10.99 million over a 10-year time frame for those projects approved in 2019 and for the St. Louis Public Schools. So that's above the current tax base. So as you look over the 3-year period, from a fiscal benefit perspective, over 10 years, we see $22.35 million of additional revenue that should be realized from the St. Louis Public Schools from the projects that we approve for tax abatement and incentives over that 3-year period. And over a 20-year period, as those abatements continue to decrease over time, we realize and see close to $128.4 million of additional tax revenue that could be realized by the St. Louis Public Schools over a 20-year period. And that's just from the last 3 years of projects that we have approved. And again, this is fiscal benefit above the base value. So as we said in that example around the $10,000 base, that's always going to be consistent. We're not taking dollars off of the tax roll or taking tax dollars away from the St. Louis Public Schools. Our goal is to foster economic growth and development. And so for a short period of time, there may be additional tax revenue that we will forego in order to receive a larger pool of revenue over a period of time. And I really believe this illustration from this chart really shows exactly that.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes.
Can you remind us again where that 10 million or up to 22 million would come from if we're getting the base, if the base amount is staying the same? Remind us again where the additional funds are coming from.
Yeah, so if, for example, if you have a 10-year, over a 10-year period for a project, if it's not going to be abated for the most part at a full tax abatement. So if it increases, you're still going to get the portion that's not abated. And then that begins to taper off. That abatement continues to taper off over time. So traditionally, we would provide incentives in a way in which upfront, we want to provide a greater incentive where the value of their property is the lowest. And then in the later part of the years, let's say the first 5 years, we give a 90% abatement. And then the second 5 years, it'd be closer to 50%. So you'll realize a greater economic benefit still of tax revenue on that second 5-year period. So it's, again, additional revenue above the base. So that's the tax revenue that's being generated by these additional investments into our city.
So this 23 million is consist only on the additional tax revenue and nothing else? Nothing
That's
like-
correct.
Okay.
That's correct. But as you all will also see on the next slide here, we actually are on track for a record year for the amount of construction that's happening in the city of St. Louis, just based on building permits alone. We've already surpassed $1 billion in building permits in 2021 through Q3, which is up $1 billion for all, in which we had $1 billion for all of 2020. So we have seen significant development in BJC, WashU, and other larger anchor institutions, but also we're continuing to see development happen without the use of incentives. So as we are continuing to evaluate projects and revitalizing and restructuring the incentive model to ensure that we are not over incentivizing projects, they meet the but-for test, they have community benefits built in, we have seen less projects actually needing incentive overall. And so as we look at next steps and some of our partnership opportunities, as I described at the beginning of the conversation today, St. Louis Development Corporation is going through a strategic plan, which is titled our Economic Justice Action Plan. We plan to engage the school board members as well as the families and residents of SLPS. And we plan to have a more comprehensive strategy around community benefit agreements. I was very excited to hear that you all are discussing the deli store project. That was actually the first in its history of a business coming to the city of St. Louis and working directly with the St. Louis Public Schools on a memorandum of understanding, ensuring that we have first source employment from any student that's 18 or older. That includes the current students and the alumni. We put forth strong requirements around donations from the business, as well as them providing support and promoting SLPS to many of their vendors and customers. And this is going to be paramount as we move forward. We are the front door, SLD are the front door for many of these businesses and developers. And we want to ensure that as we are negotiating and having conversations with them, they understand that we are centering our youth, we're centering many of our low and moderate income communities, because we know we cannot achieve our full economic potential without those stakeholders being successful as well. So again, thank you. And I definitely want to open up to any remaining questions before we close out for the day.
I have a question for you, and only because you're here and we have your attention. I attend church in the Walnut Park neighborhood, and our alderperson there has been asking and working with churches, because there are a ton of churches in the area. But a few years ago, she was asking churches if we could just take 2 blocks of homes and take care of those, which is a great idea. And my church, for instance, have people who are willing to maybe buy the homes, but there's no money to improve the homes. And I know you said with tax TIFs and things like that, it's really easier to work with bigger developers. Do you guys have a micro program for situations like that? Because that really is a great idea from that alderperson to, get the various churches to work on these homes, improve the neighborhood. But the fact of the matter, even if we bought the home for the church, there's no dollars to really improve the homes right around the area. Have you guys considered a micro plan to improve some of these areas where in fact bigger developers aren't coming in?
Yeah, so it's going to take multiple facets and multiple financing sources to be able to solve that problem, which we are looking to address head on. I would say the first tool that we can explore in those scenarios is what's called a Chapter 99 or redevelopment area, when we would blight a particular area, blocks that could receive tax abatement, 20 years of abatement in an area such as that has not received investment. And so that's one way that we could achieve that, is ensuring that the taxes that any additional investment is not adding an additional burden on those residents. In addition to that, we're also looking to partner more closely with community development corporations, neighborhood-based organizations on creating a home ownership program in which we are able to provide capital for homeowners to be able to move into neighborhoods and afford houses that may not be able to be appraised at a certain rate, right? So as a developer, when you're coming into a neighborhood, the average cost to actually build a home or rehab a home is typically higher than the after repair value. So there needs to be additional grant funding and other sources that needs to be able to fill that gap. And so at SLDC, we are exploring ways in which we can attract philanthropic capital, leverage public and private dollars in order to create those gap fillers to incentivize development in many of those low-income areas that have those appraisal gaps, but ensuring that the homeowners are not carrying that burden, but they're also receiving the greatest benefit from that. So those are partnerships that we're creating with neighborhood organizations and CDCs to achieve those goals.
So on that same topic, since 1971, there is a state statute 92, RSMO 92, which has taken away the homes of people who get 3 years behind on their property taxes. Have we looked at just stopping taking people's homes away in the beginning, maybe abating taxes when people get behind? Because if we're talking about, values that would not be there because there would be a vacant building or losing population, we're literally running people off over, $200, $48, $15 when they can't afford those things. And yes, there is a payment plan with the collector of revenue, but that's not always feasible. So if there was some way to just abate the taxes for 5 years for people who have lived there for 15, 20, 50 years sometimes, maybe looking at keeping the residents we have already rather than bringing in new people. Is that something that's been considered, or is that something that would be considered?
Yeah, that's also a top priority within our economic justice action plan, is how do we have anti-displacement measures in effect, right? And so that includes ensuring that as property values go up, or if someone is on a fixed income or lose a job, how do we ensure that they have access to capital to be able to stay in place? And so those are, again, why we need to have stronger CDCs to work with them to identify those residents and those elders and unemployed and underemployed individuals that need that access to capital through some of our ARPA funds that we have seen allocated, helping with rental assistance, home ownership, some of those opportunities. That's where we plan to leverage those funds, is to ensure that people are able to stay in place and not pushed out due to some of the unpaid taxes or fall behind as well.
So is there a resource where people can, because I can go to these people's door, and this is what I do for a living, and tell them that they're behind on their taxes and how can we help? But is there a resource that they can go to? Is there a website where they can go apply for maybe, a $5,000 abatement or a $2,000 abatement just to get themselves back on track, or maybe just through end of life? A lot of these people are seniors, and a lot of these people are veterans who don't have, quite honestly, a long lifespan left and might want to have something to just leave their kids. So is
Yes.
there a resource where they can just?
Yeah, so we have an application process through SLDC for not just the large scale developers, but also for homeowners as well. So any homeowner can complete an application, and we can work with them at SLDC on helping those properties get abatement. We actually have a process and a map in place, which is located in the appendix that we will share, that creates opportunity for families and homeowners to be able to receive tax abatements on their houses. But again, as we talk about tax abatement, that does not impact their current taxes that they pay. Tax abatement is on any increase of the value of their house. So we would need to have measures in place and other proceeds to ensure that they're able to cover their ongoing taxes that they need to pay. And that's things that, again, SLDC is currently exploring as we're developing an economic justice fund to be able to attract that philanthropic capital to help many of those homeowners and small businesses in these marginalized and vulnerable communities.
So for the public, could you tell us what that website is or where they can find that application?
Sure. So you can go to the City of St. Louis website and look up St. Louis Development Corporation. And I can share that information more widely with the group as well. You can have exactly the link to the website and make sure that it goes out to the public.
In reference to the taxes, the question she was asking, if you're a property owner and you're behind on your taxes, that doesn't go through SLDC.
No, that does not. That
Okay,
does
that's
not.
through a different department.
Yes.
And if you're behind on your taxes, 3 years behind on your taxes, I know they won't take your property if you're $300, behind
Right.
within that 3 years. But if you're into like thousands or whatever, then there is a payment plan process that they try to work with those homeowners to make sure they're able to stay in their homes.
That's
I know
correct.
some of the challenges that people are faced with is that you have troubled homeowners.
Right.
You have some that have totally wreaked havoc within their community. So is that what you were referencing to when you were saying you kind of try to work with the CDCs, the community development
Exactly.
organizations, to try to get a pulse of what's going on actually within that community before those steps are made?
Yeah, so I think I want to look at it from more of a strategic and holistic approach at a neighborhood level and not just on an individual level, because many of the neighbors in the neighborhoods that I'm sure you're speaking up for, Director Val, is they're not the only ones in that neighborhood that have challenges. And so it needs to be more of a strategic approach around how do we work with those CDCs to address the entire ecosystem. Because for many of them, they're living next door to vacant and abandoned houses. Many of them have issues with landscaping and other challenges. And as a resource and a strategic partners that we are developing on the ground in partnership with the community development corporations and neighborhood-based organizations, we're able to have more strategic conversations and discussions with them, but also place forth resources and capital to help them address some of those most immediate and urgent needs on an ongoing basis for those residents, but also for the neighborhood as a whole. Because for many of these areas, it's not just one house, it's an entire block or a couple blocks that need to be redeveloped and brought up to par. So that's really the approach that we're looking at, is working more holistically in communities and neighborhoods, and not just much so on an individual basis, but we can provide assistance for that as well.
Mr. Richardson, there's a group, and I'm wondering if you're familiar with them, Healthy Homes, that do just that.
Yes.
They pay the taxes and help families repair their homes. So is that an organization that your office collaborates with?
Yes, so we have partnerships with the Healthy Home program, as well as our community development administration, CDA, that works and provides grants and services for them to do home repairs for many of these areas as well.
So I had a question about earlier, you mentioned we know from the census data that families are some of the fastest of all the demographics leaving St. Louis City. They're some of the fastest leaving. Can you share some information with us about some programs or incentives that you have to kind of help with the retention and attraction of families?
Yeah, so that's why I really mentioned the 4 pillars that I spoke about: workforce development, business empowerment, and neighborhood stabilization. Many of these families are leaving the city of St. Louis because they don't feel as though opportunity currently exists there for them. And so if they don't have workforce opportunities, if they don't have opportunities for employment to make a living wage, to stay in place, if they don't feel as though they live in a safe and thriving community and environment that's conducive to the growth of their households or their families, then they will seek opportunities elsewhere. And so we've seen a population decline again of over 17,000 residents, with over 27,000, more of those residents being Black residents, and with the majority of those residents leaving and exiting many of our highly distressed census tracts in North St. Louis and also in areas of Southeast St. Louis. And so we must address our attention there to ensure that we stabilize those communities, because if not, families are going to continue to migrate outside of St. Louis. So we must turn that tide. And again, I look forward to partnering with the school district as you all are developing your strategic plan. How can SLDC tie our strategic plan alongside of that, but bringing resources to areas that we know we want to target in a more direct and focused manner together? So,
Are there any additional questions? Well, Mr. Richardson, I want to thank you for you and your team's presentation and for centering St. Louis Public Schools as a part of the conversation and inviting us to the table.
yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time today.
Thank you. Madam President, I think there's one item that Mrs. Fowler wants to bring forward for a vote tonight. And I think that's the last item.
Yes, that's on the consent agenda. It's the new item 1109-2121. It is the, we're hoping to get a vote on the SPLS board member onboarding plan, which was developed by the governance committee led by Matt on this particular project. And I sent out the onboarding plan at the prior meeting, and we're hoping to get a vote to accept that so we could start implementing the onboarding program.
Just a point of order, is this because it's titled 1109-2121? Are we pulling this from the November agenda and taking it as a separate item on its own to vote on tonight? Just
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
How the motion would be structured?
Yes, and I discussed it with Mr. St. Omer prior to the meeting.
Got it.
With that second,
Well, there,
Well, I
No
move that
motion
we
is
approve the SLPS board member onboarding plan presented by the governance committee.
Second.
Ms. Williams.
Ms. Sonier?
Yes.
Ms. Cousins?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
yes,
Ms. Fowle?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Roberts?
Yes.
Motion passed.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
all everybody wants.
Ms. Williams.
Ms. Sonier?
Yes.
Ms. Cousins?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Ms. Fowle? Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Roberts?